A dark time began in Israel after King Solomon died. The people started to forget about God under the rule of their worst king, Ahab. King Ahab's cruel wife, Jezebel, hunted down and killed God's prophets. The land was stained with the blood of these innocent people, and holiness was forgotten. The people of Israel no longer remembered God's name. Instead, they prayed to idols that were made of simple stone and wood, forgetting their true faith. But God had not forgotten his people, even in their disobedience. He was preparing a special answer to their problems from the quiet hills of Gilead. From a forgotten and barren land, a man named Elijah appeared. He was destined to change the course of history for the nation of Israel forever. Elijah's name itself was a powerful message. It meant, "My God is Yahweh," and it carried a promise of both judgment and powerful fire from above. This is the story of a mighty prophet. He had the power to stop the rain from falling, and could even call down fire directly from heaven. He was so favored by God that he never experienced death. However, this is also the story of the human side of this great and powerful prophet. Behind the powerful prophet was a man who had his own fears. He struggled with many doubts and often felt a deep sense of loneliness inside. Elijah was a human being, just like anyone else. His biggest fight was not against kings, but against his own personal doubts and feelings of isolation. For many years, Elijah had lived a quiet life. He was hidden away in the barren mountains, living in solitude and preparing for his purpose. He was not a warrior, nor was he a priest. He wore simple clothes made from camel hair and had a thick beard covering his face. His eyes seemed to burn with a special kind of fire. Then one day, God finally revealed to him what his special mission and calling was. The long period of waiting was finally over for him. Elijah got up, came down from the mountains, and went straight to the city of Samaria. Samaria was the capital city, the heart of all the corruption. It was the place where the evil King Ahab and his wife Jezebel ruled. The soldiers who were guarding the palace gates saw him coming. They were frozen in place by an unseen and powerful force that allowed him to pass. Elisha walked through the palace without any announcement or guards. The servants moved away from him with every step he took down the long corridors. Even the large columns of the palace seemed to recognize that this was not just another visitor. A wild-looking prophet had arrived, guided by God himself. King Ahab was sitting on his throne, surrounded by his advisors. He was also surrounded by many idols and symbols of his own vanity. Before the king could even ask who the stranger was, Elijah stood before him. He spoke words that would change the kingdom's future forever. Elijah declared that as surely as the Lord God of Israel lives, there would be no dew or rain for years, except by his own word. A deep and heavy silence fell over the entire throne room. No one in the room dared to even breathe after hearing the prophet's declaration. Elijah did not wait for King Ahab to respond. He turned around and disappeared just as mysteriously as he had first arrived in the palace. The king did not say a word or try to stop him. He just sat there, completely motionless, as the prophet's powerful words began to come true. Suddenly, all of the clouds in the sky began to vanish. The air became very dry, and the sky seemed to close up completely. As Elijah was leaving the city, God spoke to him again. He told him to go eastward and to hide by the brook Cherith. God promised Elijah that he would be able to drink from the brook. He also told him that he had commanded ravens to bring him food there. Elijah obeyed God without any hesitation at all. He headed to the east, and the land behind him started to become very dry and barren. The cool breezes stopped blowing across the land. The morning dew that used to moisten the fields of Israel every day was no longer there. The sun became scorching hot, and the fields began to burn. The once fertile and proud nation slowly began to wither away under the heat. The judgment that Elijah had prophesied had started. For 3 long years, Not even a single drop of rain would fall upon the earth. While the kingdom suffered from the drought, Elijah traveled. He went across hills and valleys until he found the hidden brook called Cherith. The brook was hidden between dry hills near the Jordan River. It was just a thin line of water in the middle of the dusty land. Elijah settled in this hidden place, deep within the desert. Every morning and every evening, a true miracle would happen just for him. At dawn, the silence would be broken by the sound of wings. Ravens, which were black-feathered birds, would appear in the sky above him. These ravens carried bread and meat in their beaks for the prophet. They would land near him and place the food right in front of him. According to the law, ravens were considered to be unclean birds. Yet these were the very creatures that God chose to deliver food to his prophet. In this place of deep solitude, Elijah ate his meals. He drank from the brook and watched as the days turned into weeks and then months. The drought spread its dark shadow over the entire nation of Israel. All of the wells ran dry, and the fields became completely barren. Desperate, King Ahab ordered his men to find Elijah. He screamed at them, wanting to find the man he blamed for all of his problems. However, no one could find Elijah because he remained hidden. But even in his hiding place, he started to notice a very big change. The water level in the brook was getting lower and lower. The drought that he himself had prophesied was now starting to affect him too. One morning, he bent down to get a drink of water. He found that there was no water left, only some dampness between the stones. The brook Cherith had finally dried up completely. But Elijah did not panic. Instead, he held on to his strong faith and waited for God. At last, God's voice spoke to him very clearly. He told him to arise and go to a place called Zarephath in Sidon. God told him that he had commanded a widow in that city to take care of him. This was dangerous territory, the homeland of Queen Jezebel. But Elijah did not hesitate to obey God's command. He stood up, wrapped his cloak around himself, and began his long and difficult journey. The journey was very hard because of the intense sun. The drought had spared nothing, and all living things seemed to be suffering under it. When Elijah finally arrived at the gates of Zarephath, he saw her. A frail woman, dressed in rags, was picking up dry sticks. He knew in his spirit that this was the widow God had told him about. He approached her and calmly asked for a little water to drink. The woman turned to obey him without knowing who he was. But before she left, Elijah also asked her for a piece of bread. The woman stopped and told him she had no bread. All she had was a little flour and oil to make one last meal for her son and herself. Elijah told her not to be afraid and to go home. He asked her to first make a small cake of bread for him. He then gave her a promise from the Lord God of Israel. The jar of flour and the pitcher of oil would not run out until it rained. The woman had a difficult choice to make. She could either hold on to the little she had or trust the stranger's powerful words. She chose to believe in the word of this stranger. She went home and used her last bit of flour and oil to bake for him. When she returned to the jar, she found it was still full. The oil also had not run out, just as the prophet had promised her. That day, the woman, her son, and Elijah all had enough to eat. And the miracle continued for many days after that first meal. But then, tragedy struck the household. The widow's son became very ill and suddenly stopped breathing. The woman was completely heartbroken and devastated. She cried out to Elijah, blaming him for her son's death. Elijah took the boy's body and carried him to an upstairs room. He cried out to God, asking why this had happened. Then he stretched himself out over the boy's body 3 times, praying for his life. After a long and heavy silence, the boy's chest began to rise. Breath returned to his body, and he was alive once again. Elijah carried the living boy back down to his mother. The woman's faith was restored, and she knew Elijah was a true man of God. For 3 years, the drought continued across all of Israel. Even the wealthy people began to feel the pain of hunger and despair. But not everyone had bowed down to the false god Baal. A man named Obadiah, who was King Ahab's steward, remained faithful to the Lord. Obadiah had secretly hidden 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves. He risked his own life every day to bring them bread and water. One day, King Ahab ordered Obadiah to search the land. He wanted to find any grass or water that might still be left for the animals. As Obadiah was searching the barren fields, he suddenly saw Elijah. The prophet was standing tall and unwavering on the dusty road. Obadiah fell to the ground and asked if it was really him. Elijah told him to go and tell King Ahab that he had returned. Obadiah was very scared and feared for his life. But Elijah promised him that he would stand before King Ahab that very day. So Obadiah went and told the king the news. Ahab immediately went to meet Elijah, the man he called the troublemaker of Israel. Elijah replied that Ahab was the real troublemaker. He challenged him to gather all the people and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. On the mountain, Elijah stood alone against 450 prophets of Baal. He proposed a test to see whose God would answer with fire. The prophets of Baal prepared their altar and cried out to their God. They shouted and danced wildly from morning until noon, but nothing happened. Elijah began to mock them, suggesting that their God was busy. The prophets became desperate, even cutting themselves. But still, there was no answer. Then it was Elijah's turn to prepare his altar. He took 12 stones and rebuilt the broken altar of the Lord God of Israel. He then did something that seemed impossible during a drought. He asked for 4 large jars of water to be poured over the sacrifice and the wood. They poured the water not once, but 3 times. The altar was completely soaked, and the water filled the trench that was all around it. Elijah then prayed to the Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. He asked God to show the people that he was the one true God. Suddenly, a scorching fire blazed down from heaven. It consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even all of the water. The people fell to their knees in awe and shouted out, "The Lord, He is God." The power of Yahweh had been proven to everyone there. Elijah then commanded that all the false prophets of Baal be seized. They were taken down to the Kishon Brook and executed for their idolatry. Elijah then told King Ahab that he heard the sound of approaching rain. He climbed back up the mountain and began to pray fervently. He sent his servant to look toward the sea 7 times. On the 7th time, the servant saw a small cloud, the size of a man's hand. That small cloud quickly grew larger, and the sky turned dark. A powerful wind began to blow, and heavy rain started to fall. The hand of the Lord came upon Elijah with great power. He tucked his cloak into his belt and began to run with supernatural speed. Elijah outran King Ahab's chariot and horses. This showed everyone who truly ruled over the nation of Israel, and it was not the king. When Queen Jezebel heard what had happened, she was furious. She sent a messenger to Elijah with a death threat, promising to kill him. The prophet who had faced down hundreds was now afraid of one woman. Fear gripped his heart, and he fled for his life into the wilderness. Exhausted and in despair, he collapsed under a broom tree. He cried out to God and asked him to take his life, feeling completely broken. But God did not abandon him in his darkest moment. An angel appeared, gently touched him, and told him to get up and eat the food provided. Strengthened by the food, Elijah traveled for 40 days and 40 nights. He journeyed to Mount Horeb, the sacred mountain of God. In a cave on the mountain, God spoke to him. He asked Isaiah what he was doing there, hiding away from his purpose and mission. Elijah complained that he was the only one left who was faithful. But God revealed that he had reserved 7,000 people in Israel who had not bowed to Baal. God gave Elijah a new purpose, and new instructions. He was to anoint new kings and also find his own successor, a man named Elisha. Elijah found Elisha plowing a field and placed his cloak on him. This was the sign of a divine calling and the passing of a holy purpose. Elisha left everything behind to follow Elijah. He even slaughtered his oxen and burned his plowing equipment, showing his complete commitment to God's call. Years later, King Ahab was killed in battle. An arrow shot at random struck him, just as a prophet of God had warned would happen to him. When Elijah's time on earth was finished, he did not die. A chariot of fire with flaming horses appeared and took him up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah's cloak fell to the ground, and Elisha picked it up. A double portion of Elijah's spirit now rested upon him, and he continued the prophet's work.